Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, October 3rd, 2016 joint meeting of the Falls Church City Council and the Falls Church School Board. We are delighted you're all here with us this evening. Mr. Castillo, did you have anything you wanted to say before we get started?
No, we've got two members who will be coming a little late, but I think they would not object to us starting, and I look forward to a productive meeting.
Sounds good. This is a work session, so for those of you in the audience, there would not be public participation at this particular meeting, but I anticipate there'll be plenty more opportunities for you to speak your mind, and but we're glad you're here with us this evening. Mr. Shields, do you want to go ahead and get started and make our introductions of our guests?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Tarter, Chairman Castillo, and members of the City Council, School Board. Tonight is the first get-together with Link Strategic Partners, and I'll introduce our team here in just a moment. And I think tonight's purpose is really just to lay out, to hear from Link Strategic Partners about what they've heard from you in terms of the major concerns, major questions, and put those all on the table so we all understand what those are, begin to group those and begin to sequence those in the form of how we'll answer them and how we'll make progress on the campus project. And so that's tonight's discussion. There will be follow-up meetings. There will also, we don't yet have a draft roadmap that will come after this meeting. And so tonight is just as one step in the process. And ultimately, after the roadmap is agreed to by the two bodies, then that really begins a big information gathering and public input process in which a lot of the key stakeholders in the community will get to plug into. And I think part of a key value of the roadmap is people then will be able to see, okay, this is how I will be able to plug in and give my input into the decisions that the City Council and the School Board ultimately need to make for our new campus and the economic development that goes with it. So with that, I'll just make one other note on the agenda. We have asked on the agenda at the end, after the campus discussion is over, just to have a briefing from the school board in terms of your thinking on the elementary school planning. We know that there's some planning that is happening, and I think the City Council would want to just get up to speed in terms of what the thinking is, what problem you're trying to solve, what the time frame is in which you're solving it, and some of your strategies. But first on the agenda is the campus project. So with Link Strategic Partners, we have two of our partners with Link with us, Tim Wisniewski and Sherry Rutherford. And so I want to turn it over to Tim, and he will take us through what he has learned so far and give his report.
Thank you, Wyatt. Appreciate it. Thank you, Wyatt. Appreciate all of the feedback that we've gotten so far. We're excited to be here and provide an update on what we've been hearing and explain to everybody how this fits into the broader framework of what we've been working on. I think I know most people are on the table. There's still a couple of conversations we still need to have, but we've heard a lot of really positive feedback that we're going to take moving forward. For everybody in the audience, Link Strategic Partners is a strategic communications and stakeholder engagement firm. We specialize in working with communities and working with organizations who are rooted in communities to figure out how we can take disparate voices, find some common themes, unify them, and move forward together. So our agenda for tonight is pretty straightforward. We were out here for a week of engagement in August that led up to a joint session on August 9th. Just want to use that as a place to provide context for where our discussions began, and then go into the process development timeline to show how we got to where we are tonight and where we plan to go from here. We'll move that into the thematic highlights that we've heard from the audits. These are broad themes that we've heard as we continue to distill them into a stakeholder audit report that we'll be providing for everybody's feedback following this meeting. Moving from there into the preliminary process framework concepts, which are just some initial thoughts we've had around how these themes start to fit together into something that's more linear than we've seen in the past. And then a reminder of the next steps from here to remind you where we'll be engaging and what the process will be forward. We were out here in August for a joint session to develop a one-pager to really take a week's worth of information and condense years of what you all had been talking about into our best understanding of where you were in this roadmap. This was a process that had started and stopped a couple of times, and our task really was to come in and identify key decision points and look at what we called 2 concurrent tracks, but basically 2 interwoven and deeply interrelated processes that the school board and the city council would undertake together. This is what we came up with. This is available online. I think you all are familiar with it. And these are some of the initial questions that we had. This was just from 1 week of discussion, and what we didn't benefit from in this engagement was the opportunity to speak with each of you individually and speak to a broader stakeholder group to understand how the community perceived the process, how each of you perceived the challenges and opportunities in the process, and how some of this could fit together as we attempted to find a new pathway forward. Where this fits into tonight, August 9th, we had the joint session. After about a month of good discussions, we got a contract in place on September 7th, and a week later, we had a kickoff with the internal project team. We call it a strategic brain trust. It was our chance to sit down with the city manager and some of the city and school staff to really dig into how we're going to define success on the development of a process as a whole. Moving forward would be a great metric of success, and that's what our goal is to get to. As we were getting ready for that, we conducted our first phase of stakeholder audits with the council and the school board. Like I said, this was our opportunity to get some really candid feedback, to ask some pointed questions, and see where everyone brought their personal perspectives, personal biases, and opinions into something that had been ongoing for some people for a few months, for those who had been newly elected, and others for somewhat longer. That brings us to tonight, where we can provide some updates on that. Moving forward from this session, we will begin phase 2 of stakeholder audits to broaden the circle to other stakeholders in the area. Some of what we've heard are groups like the Planning Commission, groups like the Economic Development Authority, some independent voices in the community who might be influential or have good thoughts on this process. Broadening that circle to others, including partners from UVA, Virginia Tech, WMATA, and others. What we'll do from there is develop the preliminary process roadmap and begin to show how this fits into a linear path. And we'll come back together after getting feedback from you all for another session in November, where we can really move something further along. What we've heard is kind of 4 buckets, and this should all sound extremely familiar to you because you've been having these discussions before we were ever a part of this. Information, structure, and timing emerged as broad themes in every conversation we had, and how all of these fit together in a broader vision is something that we understand we really need to wrestle with and figure out. We break these down in a sense of how they relate to each other. And this is an extremely oversimplified graphic, but it's one that came up in one of the audits, and I thought it was too good to not include. This shows time, cost, and quality, and as in most of these triangular graphics, the premise is you can only choose 2. You choose 2 and sacrifice the other. Obviously, the goal will be to find a process that finds a great balance of all 3, but as we're moving this forward, balancing the cost and quality of a project with the timeline, or finding a timeline that accounts for a better and more appealing cost and quality of project. This is something, again, that's extremely oversimplified, but these tensions were really evident in every discussion we had, no matter where someone was on each issue. The information was a clear theme that everyone we heard was in agreement on. There's a need for clear, comprehensive, and data-supported information as the basis for any process moving forward. No matter where voices were on other questions, there was a clear need for either the right information, more information, additional sources of information, additional perspectives, and figuring out how that fits in. We have quotes and we have a lot of kind of sub-questions that unfold from all of these as we think about comprehensively what this looks like. What are the realities the system faces? What are we projecting for the future of Falls Church? How does all of this start to fit together? There's a lot of questions that will all be molded into several decision points, but in broad strokes, the need for some clarity on information that we can trust and information that we can really use and wrestle with was something we heard from everybody. the information fits into the structure. And there's a clear need from what we've heard to determine if this is a group that as 14 individuals is going to come together and wrestle with the information and every single question, or if there's the possibility and an appetite for a smaller, focused, and more agile steering committee. We've heard from some voices that steering committees were extremely successful in past projects, and we've heard from other voices that they could be successful in this one with the right group. What the right group looks like remains up for discussion, but there's a need for some structure in place to balance how we're getting our information, how we're sharing our information amongst each other, and what information we need to continue to gather. At the same time, there needs to be structures in place to ensure that information flows. And at the same time, we heard that there could be an appetite for a third-party facilitator or an internal project manager to help facilitate these issues. That could be someone from the city, someone from the school board. It could be a outside group, but someone who will help manage and move this process forward once we've come to an agreement on what it looks like. Beyond that, this all starts to factor into the larger vision, and we didn't hear necessarily an agreement from all stakeholders around this table on what a vision forward looks like. A lot of this ties back into the information, but there seems to be a lack of direction or multiple directions being considered. And some of that has to do with options being considered, some of it has to do with the need for more information, and some of it has to do with the value of the community input and how that factors into the decision that this group or these two groups will make. At the same time, there's a need in terms of the vision to figure out which pieces are critical and which pieces will overlap and which pieces could be a secondary discussion that builds on something larger for the future. This all funnels into the timing, which is one of the most critical elements we heard in terms of whether or not we have a seriously urgent and pressing issue that needs to be uncovered and move forward now, or whether we have something that is a longer opportunity to really slow down, envision, and do something together. The likelihood is that this comes together in interwoven pathways that are going to be interrelated and have decision points that the two groups wrestle with separately and come back together to share or to make decisions jointly. But the pathway itself is going to be dependent upon figuring out what those timelines and urgencies are and working backwards to see exactly what the needs are. And I'll be really clear on this too. This whole 3-month engagement that we have to find a process moving forward, we've now been working on officially for about 2.5 to 3 weeks. We still have a long way to go in taking all of these themes and putting them into decision points and a framework. But there are pieces of this that as you move forward, some of this can be happening now and can influence the pathway as it unfolds. This doesn't need to be something that at the end of this, you have a process and then you start asking these questions. Some of this can be happening now, and some of it already has been. It's a question of how you harness and arrange all of that information. This is all extremely broad, and it has the tendency to sound a little vague. We have a full stakeholder audit report coming out to share, without any identifying information, the themes that we've heard, backing it up with the quotes from the balancing perspectives here. Happy to go into that as we move forward, if it's helpful to everyone to hear some of the voices, but we wanted to keep this moving and show how this fits into the rest of the process. Those themes have led to kind of a preliminary process framework. We're thinking through how you take this that we had on the 9th, recognize that it actually probably skews a little bit and gets into some timelines that don't always match up, and then figure out with all of these different questions and the questions we have yet to uncover, what do some of these processes start to look like? And if we can get this, it probably looks something a little more like this. This is conceptual. There's nothing comprehensive or exhaustive about this, but some process that begins with an agreement to move forward along the process, which seems overly simple, but for this group to come together, that's probably the starting point that we're going to need. There's an information gathering phase that seems like it'll be right up front around what the different cost options are, what the models are of renovation versus modular construction versus new construction, all of these different scenarios that we heard in the information phase. There's a lot of appetite to learn more and really figure out what's on the table. At the same time, there's the funding realities and the community vision. There's school board realities. Those have to be balanced concurrently and make sure that there's a clear vision and understanding of what each group is really trying to get out of a process like this as we begin to move forward into the construction options, capacity needs, partnership cultivation, economic development. We heard loud and clear. Economic development is something that's probably on a staggered timeline, at least 3 years after any construction project. Once you've freed up any land, once you've made any zoning adjustments, there's going to be a delay. That gets into the funding, it gets into the capacity for bonding. Those are all things that need to be considered. Something like this that probably has a lot more dotted lines linking everything and arrows pointing out other things is something that we're trying to move towards. Along the way, there will be options for community input. And this is just something that we've been sketching out to give you a little bit of a taste of how some of this is going to come together. We will obviously design it a little better than this, but this just shows you how all of these things we're hearing are playing intertwined together and really balanced. On the graphic on the right, you'll see questions of governance at the forefront, asking how we move forward and gather the information. You can always handle the information together as you decide the governance. This is not a recommendation or a solid process yet. This is just something to give you an idea of the direction it's going. And as you'll see in both of these kind of initial concepts of what this might look like, there's a lot of dividing and coming back together. There's a lot that's intertwined as the different groups balance the things that they're each responsible for. In terms of next steps, obviously where we are tonight is sharing this initial update. We'll take questions at the end, and our hope is to continue the dialogue that we've started with each of you to ensure we can get feedback on these themes, additional questions. You can say, thank you for hearing me loud and clear, or you didn't listen to me at all, and this is what we need to change. We're going to balance that as we continue moving into these phase 2 audits and getting additional details, additional perspectives from these other groups that I mentioned, and take that and build out the whiteboard images and what you've seen as what a preliminary process here looks like. Our goal with that process will be to sit down with each of you individually and get, again, some candid feedback that you can wrestle with and move things around and say, I'm really glad this is on the process, but it can't be the third box, it needs to be the first one. Or you can say, I think this needs to be developed a little further. That's our chance to dig in together. At the same time, we're looking at scheduling a site tour of George Mason just to do a walkthrough and see. There's open discussion on who accompanies different groups on that, if there's a need for a contractor or an additional independent expert to accompany and provide commentary along the way. That's something to be discussed. After we do the site tour, we'll be looking to get feedback on the process roadmap, moving us into something much further along in less than a month by the time we get to the November joint session. From there, we'll take any additional feedback, hone it, and begin working towards the final product on what this process is, that hopefully at that point, everyone has some confidence and trust in how it can move forward for this group. As I mentioned, the phase 2 stakeholder audits will be a broader group. We've heard that we need to talk to the Planning Commission, co-located groups, UVA, Virginia Tech, WMATA, the Falls Church Economic Development Authority, and some additional independent voices. As you all consider additional voices you think we should talk to, of course, we welcome those perspectives as well. And at this point, I want to pause on the overview. That's the end of the kind of prepared bit. Like I said, we have quotes we can dig into. I'm sure you all have lots of fun questions. So I'm ready to hear some thoughts and feedback on where we can go from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions or comments? Ms. Hardy?
Thanks, Tim and Sherry, for joining us tonight and spending the past couple of weeks with hearing all of us. I'm sure that is. A big undertaking. One tactical thing first, going back to your stakeholder audits, I might suggest to make sure that I want to underscore the importance of reaching out to Fairfax County, whether that is you guys or us. I feel like we need to have that conversation early and often, given that they're going to be a prime neighbor there. And then another one I'd add to that list is Federal Realty. So they own the property across the other way. And so I want to make sure that if we are broadening the thinking on what we can do in that quadrant, that we include their input as well. And then a more general question is, based on what you've heard from us so far, what you think the early kind of process map looks like, are we still shooting for kind of a November 2017 referendum? Or does that look too aggressive? What's your sense right now?
In terms of the timeline that we've heard, there needs to be more information gathered on the realities of what the system is facing. It seems like there wasn't consistent agreement across the board on what the school is actually facing and how that spins off into the possibility for renovation versus construction or something in the middle. We'd recommend from that point getting the information gathered so we can make a decision on what the timeline urgency is.
And precisely what additional information would answer those questions, in your estimation?
So the realities of the school system, the safety of it, and I say school system of George Mason High School, if it is safe, if it is possible to renovate it,
Could we take I thought you were talking about capacity issues largely.
Capacity would be part of the larger discussion. The initial thought around the timeline here is if there's an urgency that the school needs immediate and direct support, there's not a lot of disagreement that something needs to happen, but the extent of what that is largely up in the air from what we've heard. We heard people on both sides of it and in the middle. So the capacity is something that needs to be addressed as part of the broader vision, but the kind of current status of the school itself is something that I think needs to be a starting point.
Okay, but getting back to Ms. Hardy's question, what would stand between us and a November 2017 referendum? With respect to enrollment numbers, nobody has a crystal ball that will see too far into the future. So, what precise additional inputs would we need to meet a 2017 deadline for a referendum?
For a referendum in 2017, it's hard to say. The question here is on the urgency, and there are voices on this group that need more information about the status and the cost of options. What happens in a process like this is people are moving the ball in a circle by asking different questions and just pushing it around. To move forward in a process that's agreeable, there needs to be some real clarity on this process as a whole and what that looks like to make sure people can agree they have something to move down together. And there needs to be some clarity about the information and the current status as it exists and what the actual needs are. This sounds circular. There's a lot to be said about the voices who are looking for where we are in the safety and the other issues here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to press you too hard on this, but I think you're saying two things. You're saying there are people who think maybe there's no urgency to go to a November 2017 referendum.
Correct.
And so I think one of the questions is, what is that based on? And then I think there's another group you suggest that may not know one way or the other, but they need more information.
Right, I think
and I guess the question is, so what information would they need to make that decision?
Right, and the information that they seem to need from what we're hearing is information on what needs to be done in the school, what the solutions and costs are, and then how that factors into either a renovation or a construction opportunity, and that gets into the cost and into the timeline.
Okay, so, but all of that is doable within it's not like there's some information that we won't have until October of 2017. Right. We could do November 2017 if that's where we want to go, is what I'm hearing. So it's not a question of there's certain information we won't be able to get in time to make that decision,
Right.
There's simply the question, that decision may need to be made.
Right.
Okay.
Did you have a thought, Sherry?
No, I don't think, I'm sorry, I don't think we've heard anything at this point that would preclude that, to your point. But it's a matter of getting the information together to make people comfortable in moving forward. But there's nothing in terms of the timeline that I think that we've heard that would not allow that to happen.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Conley, I think did you have something you wanted to say? And then Ms. Oliver.
Just to the kinds of information that you're talking about, because that's kind of a nebulous information. And that kind of goes back to the conversation that we had, just that it seems like as you listen to the voices in this group and in the community, different people think that different things can be done with the high school, and different things might be able to be done with the high school, and all of them come with their own positives and negatives. So as you're talking about information gathering, that's the kind of information you're talking about. I just want to confirm that we want to be saying, yes, we could do this to the high school, and it would cost this much money, and it would take this much time, and these are the pluses and minuses of that. And then here's option B, and those are the pluses and minuses of that. So that's all clearly laid out.
Right.
Is that the information you're talking
Yeah,
about? Okay.
it's laying out some of those options and really exploring a body of information that we trust and have confidence in as a group. And some of that is enrollment projections to the best of our ability. Some of it is capacity needs and the current state of the school. It's that collection of information that all of us can agree we trust it. We trust where these numbers have come from. We understand it. At the same time, it's the information gathering in terms of cost and bonding and what we can afford as a system as a discussion that needs to happen, because we've heard very clearly from certain voices that without cost being at or near the front of this process, then we can't move forward. So it's a question of the cart leading the horse at times, but it's coming together in an agreement that this is a group that is going to find the information, agree on it, and wrestle it into something we can use to move forward.
Ms. Oliver?
I'm just thinking about the little triangle you put up there about time, cost, and quality. And Justin, to some extent, we can push this process through to November of 2017, but some of the quality we might have to give up in order to do that would be some people might not feel that they have all the information or feel that they have information they can trust, or we might, as two bodies, need to throw more resources at this project, bring in, a project team to sort of ride herd on all of us. One thing, just general question I had is, have you heard from all of the 14 people that were supposed to participate by today?
We still have, I believe, 2 conversations to have. They're scheduled, but we haven't completed the full group.
And this is the type of thing that will be important if we want to hold to a November 2017 guideline. We all need to be committed to that deadline and meet the interim steps. And we need to be prepared to make decisions by key deadlines, even if we feel like we want more information, because that's been something that as a group we have done a lot.
Other comments?
So to my chair's point, and about Tim, about the about next year's referendum for November next year. I'm just putting down some things, not in any particular order, but for the last 2 or 2.5 years, my understanding is if I do this backwards, from November 2017, there's a deadline by which we have to notify a court about that we're going to a referendum. Is that the case?
90 days or something.
90 days. So that brings us to maybe July. So I guess the question we're asking is to agree to something, to get design and selection, to get bonding, to cost it, for us to agree, have community input, issue an RFP. Can we do this in 6 months?
I think we can find a process, but
You don't have to commit, but I'm asking, I guess maybe I'm throwing it out and saying, is 6 months an aggressive timetable to get everything here done?
6 months is aggressive, but not impossible. What we're hearing is that there is a divergence in the voices on where this is, and the reason these seem like vague questions is because it's unclear at times it's unclear at times where exactly this is going to fall out as a decision point on the process. These are just open questions right now, whereas the gathering of information could be commissioning additional studies and bringing in experts, and that could be something that expands the process. It could be this group walking through the school, for example, with an expert who, as a walkthrough, points out different things, and the group decides that that is sufficient in terms of information gathering. There's different levels each of these could go to as decision points, and the speed with which you can move through that would determine if your timeline is possible.
Because I'm just thinking about when you be complete, or Link Partners will complete your process, which should take us into maybe November, December, and usually once you hit Thanksgiving, I think the rest of the year is shot. And so we're starting January, and wonder if, with all these things outlined, whether the November 2017 referendum is overly optimistic. But anyway, I'll leave that to my colleagues.
Other questions from Ms. Gill?
So based on the conversations you've had, I know we haven't had a chance to speak yet. Based on the conversations you've had, do you have a list of information that people are requesting so that we could look at what is the list of information out there? We can prioritize it in terms of, a majority of people think we need this, so that we can start moving forward maybe on gathering some of the outstanding information that people think they need in order to move forward in the process?
I don't have that list with me tonight, but that's something that we could put together. There's still conversations to be had, but it's something we can put together and add to. I think, again, to your point, if you take something like community engagement as an example, in terms of how this process will move forward and if a referendum in 2017 is possible, we heard some voices that think this is a short process, we've engaged the community and we don't need to do any more. And there's other voices that think we need to re-engage the community to restart the process and do a broad, comprehensive visioning. We're not here to have an opinion one way or the other on which is better. We're just here to help corral some of that into a process. So that's where the uncertainty seems to come from our perspective. But I think the information gathering phase and getting that comprehensive list of questions is something we can do and continue doing together. The question will be how this group wants to move forward with that, and we can be flexible with that.
Question about your 2 out of 3. When you say quality, what do you mean quality?
So quality in this sense, broadly, it would be the depth of the overall vision. It would be some of the project variables, what you have to give up to make something happen. It's loosely defined for this, but it would be the depth of visioning, some of that community input that people value. It would be kind of how broad and comprehensive the quality of the overall process would be.
Because the elephant in the room to me is, and always will be, the financing of the project, the school project, whatever it is. Because the way this has been teed up, we would have to bond that up front, because there won't be any development money coming in, at least as currently contemplated. And I think that the lenders would assume that we would bear the full cost of that. So how do we, and so one of the things that I think is a key question is, what is the community's appetite for the level of debt they're willing to assume? And the financing is extremely complicated. And how do we engage on that question of what's possible and explain what financing enables and what it doesn't? Because I thought initially quality might mean Quonset huts or something, or something that's very temporary. So quality simply is a process substitute, from what I'm gathering.
Right. And
so how do we have the financing conversation?
Right, and so quality, to your point, would also include, elements of green space, for example. Is this going to be a park? Are there going to be endeavors along the line with partners like UVA and Virginia Tech that we're going to fully vet and explore how they might want to be involved? Are there going to be programming opportunities in the future because of this? It's a question of how much of that you can explore and how much of it you can anticipate in a broader master vision. I think in terms of the bonding piece of it, the question then becomes how comprehensive of the school can you fully wrap around with a set range? We heard from most voices that the cost is not necessarily a number, but a range of possibilities. And a lot of that has to deal with a level of comfort with the anticipated economic development, which is another question to explore. So the triangle with time and cost and quality really balances into the range that the group is comfortable with. And we've heard, again, anywhere from $40 to $80 million as a comfort range, possibilities upwards of 112 depending on future opportunities, and some of that is contingent, again, upon the partnership and any additional resources from the outside.
Okay, but this raises a key process question. You're talking about a linear approach, which I think makes sense. And as I can see this, and correct me if I'm wrong, the linear project would be, at some date, the first step would be putting out an RFP for a school project. You would have the proposed school project. That would then be put up for bonding because we won't have any development. So how do you have a comprehensive discussion about development if development is 3 years hence? And it sounds to me as if people want to nail down the development plan before they're willing to proceed with the school project. And yet, given that one's 3 years out from the other, how do you do that?
The key issue, I think, to that question is the degree of community feedback and where the group stands on that. One of the questions that we asked in the discussion is if there is a clear vision for the future, and it didn't seem that there was in terms of what this would look like. The RFP to be put out in terms of a vision and what you could get back in a school is limited in terms of those opportunities. I think that's the simplest way I can answer it. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Well, I still believe one of the threshold questions is what's affordable and what does affordable mean? So, I mean, that's one of the questions that needs to come out before this moves forward. So before you get to that point, it's one of the preliminary, of the information gathering. And I mean, there's no clarity, at least from the audit reports I've read, around that. So I think that is a threshold question, and until that gets answered, or at least in a position where people can feel comfortable moving forward, understanding what the reasonable options are, understanding what's viable, and what's, again, how do you define affordable for this group? And once we have that, then we could move forward in terms of defining what's next.
Mr. Duncan?
I think Mr. Castillo, obviously, since he's a smart man, has identified, what's most going to be on my mind. I haven't had a chance to talk with you all yet, and I'm looking forward to it on Wednesday. But, I mean, as I try to frame what I'm going to tell you, I'm looking to create a special development district on the Upper West Side that will pay for a school of, the highest quality and enduring life. And by enduring, I mean, I hope that people will not have to sit here for and repeat this exercise for at least another 30 to 40 years. So my question is going to be to you and to everybody, how do we arrange ourselves to have a community dialogue focused on creating a special development district? What does that area look like up there? We've had numerous visioning sessions and activities. We've had elections. I think you're correct that we've not come to any kind of agreement on what that area up there is going to look like. It ranges from a $40 million renovation and birds and bunnies with the rest of the land to, a pretty intensively developed new commercial district, sort of a new West City, which will support substantially, if not almost completely, the cost of a brand new school. And that is a wide range of opinions that are held in this community, and I think even around this table. And so, I mean, I don't know how long that's going to take, but I'm sure that it is going to be a process that needs to involve the Planning Commission and the Economic Development Authority and, all our other boards and commissions, the citizens who eat, live, and breathe this stuff, in addition to the people out in the community who are activists and have been activists on this and expect to be heard. So that's just the sort of elevator speech for what I want to talk to you all about on Wednesday. Consistent with that, then, to me, the structure of the process, whatever it is, needs to be extremely transparent. It needs to meet at times when the public can be engaged and aware. I like personally the idea of a smaller, agile group. At the same time, I think that group needs to check in with the larger body maybe once every couple of months. And then the other 2 points I wanted to make are, one, as I hear you and everybody else talk about this, the soonest that we would open a school, absolute soonest, would be August of 2020. And that would be a pretty aggressive timetable. That would be a referendum in 17, go to it in 18, build it 18, 19, get it open sometime, in the spring, summer of 2020. So that tells me that that's 3 school years in a building where, the roof is leaking and the HVAC doesn't work. So part of the information gathering process that I would like to see is what kind of money are we going to have to spend to get through with the building that we have now, because we can't just not fix it, and that's going to cost something. And finally, to emphasize the point that Ms. Hardy made, which I've made before myself, it cannot be emphasized enough that we must include all the Fairfax County players in this process from the very beginning. Several of us have had conversations with elected officials whose districts abut this property, which, although it is ours, it neighbors, all the Haycock Road communities, the new Chestnut Hill development, big players, community associations, political people, and it is just essential that we have some sort of process that almost creates a subgroup, I think, that checks in with them regularly so that we do not end up, when we go to referendum, where we ended up with on Mount Daniel. That cannot happen again. We have to know that the county is bought into what it is that we're trying to do, particularly since I, at least personally, think it's critical that we have pretty extensive and intensive development up there to pay for, the school that I hope that we all can be proud of. That is not an area that the county envisions for intensive development, and we're proposing, one option is for us to propose that. And in order to even have a shot at making that happen, we've got to have the supervisors and the neighborhood associations on board with us, because if we don't, they'll just make our lives hell when we deal with VDOT, WMATA, UVA, Virginia Tech.
Of course.
So I think part of what I think I'm hearing in the room tonight is frustration that we can't actually make any progress this evening. You haven't spoken to everyone. You want to expand the number of stakeholders. We do not have a process map to talk about. We don't even have a list of key information that we can delegate out. So, we could talk, because we've done it before, in circles for a long time, but I'm wondering what else this evening the two bodies think we can usefully do, or whether we just need to get these other stakeholder audits done and get that process map developed and out to us in advance of the November 1st meeting. How quickly you can get us a list of the key questions so that on some level we're able to deal with that. I hear urgency in the room, either urgency just to get a decision made or urgency to deal with the school itself, and I'm not sure that spending a lot more time tonight is going to get us any further along the process. So I'm just throwing out there, what do we want to get out of tonight? Can we focus on that? And
Ms. Hardy?
I agree. Tim, I think you offered that you had a list of the preliminary kind of big questions or buckets of questions you heard from us. Given that you have met with 12 out of 14 of us, would it be useful to kind of hear from this group's input whether those look generally in line with what we're thinking? I mean, I'm guessing that if there's 12 out of 14 of us who offered you ideas, that the other two aren't going to be too far off. And it's probably challenging to get all 14 of us together regularly. So to make the most of the evening, should we move to that? What does the group think? I think this group is hungry to get into more of the meaty stuff, so that's
Right.
probably where you're hearing some of the frustration.
Right, and so what our goal was to take kind of feedback on what we heard tonight and wrap that into the report that we're preparing. So I don't have that prepared. We can kind of walk through what some of these decision points entail. Like I said, the comprehensive list of questions will get wrapped up into like broader decision points, such as, is renovation a possibility? It has a whole list of questions within it that get into the state of the school and the state of repair costs and other information that we need to seek. So that's not something that we would have necessarily. I'm flexible. We can get that to you pretty aggressively. I'm not sure it's something that we would have for tonight.
Okay, other comments? Oh, sorry, Mr. Z. Then Mr.
Well, that's
Snyder.
okay. Well, if I were a lawyer, I would just say that we've now burned 8/10 of an hour on expensive consultants that we've gotten, as far as I'm concerned, nowhere. So I agree with all due respect to Tim and Sarah. I think we're done here with the consulting report. We need to move on. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks very much. I'm not sure I know quite how to follow that. Anyway, occurred to me there, in looking at this, I don't want to go to the community unless we have a project which a fair number of us think is a really good project. And so in order to get there, there are some fundamentals. It seems to me in the school, some of the questions that I'm interested in is what's the cost of basically preserving what's there? That's what I would call the no bill. It's just maintaining what's there. How long is that good for? That'll be driven by school population. What's the cost and what's the time horizon that will serve the school population? The second one then is sort of a combination of preserving what can be preserved. I don't know, the auditorium, I don't know what. Preserve what you can preserve, add on, build to meet the capacity that you think you will have in a reasonable period of time. And then there's the tear it down and build a new building. Now, each of those in turn has cost impacts and quality impacts. And then how do you fund these different levels? At one level, it's eminently fundable. I think we can, recognizing, by the way, that our operational costs, and this is the key thing, our operational costs on both the school side and the city are probably not going down, they're probably going up. School populations, I've heard, are going up. I can see it with the buses across the street. So it's not a situation where we can take the cost of this project in a vacuum, because we have every other cost fundamentally probably going up. Increased population, needs more police, in schools need more teachers. It's great, brings a lot of energy, it also brings a lot of cost. So we need some then sophisticated economic modeling on each of these options. And for me, that's the information that would be most useful to me. Here are the options for the schools. Now, I recognize that there's a desire to have economic development. Clearly, with the new build, if that's what we decide to do, we better have a lot of economic development, because otherwise we tank the city financially. So each one of these then triggers a combination of funding elements that we need to pick apart and look at. And then we need to see if we can build a consensus here that we collectively feel that we can legitimately pose to the voters and hopefully get a yes vote. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, kind of my thought process.
Mr. Mayor, I want to set expectations here. Tim, are you developing a process? Are you making decisions for us? Because I'm not sure where this is going. As in, my understanding of your role is you're going to define a process that we would then use to come to decisions. But it sounds to me like we have some expectations of you guys coming up with some numbers for us, but those sound to me like decisions we have to make. Am I mixing things here?
No, you're not. We're here to help sift through this and put this together into a process.
A process.
Exactly.
Which you would deliver to us, let's say, before the end of the year.
Right.
Hopefully.
I think
but the issue with the numbers and the decisions about what it costs and affordability, that's our decision, right?
Correct.
After you present us with a process.
Correct.
Okay,
And-
I just want to make sure the expectation is not, we're not expecting you to come up with those numbers. I just want to get that clear.
And I appreciate that. In this, you know, when we wrap up these stakeholder audits, we'll be able to say we heard from a majority of people this, or we heard that there was, you know, a lot of division in the voices and no unity. We'll be able to say that, and we're here to be your partner. So in as much as we can have these conversations and kind of make recommendations along the way or show the different options, we can't come up with numbers and we can't make the decisions, but we can help shepherd and put this together. That's the goal for us.
Just so I can understand your role. Okay, thank you.
Could you do me a favor? Could you back up the slides? You had a sort of a cascading pyramid. There we go. Okay. So it seems to me from this, there's the break point of school board realities and then the funding and community vision. It seems to me, to answer Ms. Oliver's question, so what are we doing? And Mr. Z, I think, also said, you know, so what the hell are we doing? Does it not make sense as a first step, since the first domino that falls here is going to be the school program, whatever that ends up being, that the school board would go through the issue of looking at what high school do we need? What are our capacity needs? Examine those and come up with what we think makes sense and discuss the options that were considered and figure out, so, okay, here were options A, B, and C, and this is the one that we think makes sense, and use that as our first step forward.
Right. And not to put too fine a point on it, but I put agreement on a process forward because there's a need here when we get into.
Please remember to use the microphone.
The agreement on the process forward here in this case means that before we even get into information gathering and as we're asking the questions that we need to find answers for, there has to be a willingness not to say that I've heard someone say $40 million and I can't deal with that. It's to say, as both groups working together, and whether, again, that's a committee structure, whether it's the full group, whether it's a project manager, it's to say we each need to find places to find more information and do this together. And once we agree to move forward, then we can start taking these in the pieces that make sense for each of us.
But, I mean, from the standpoint of whatever the school program would be, that would be in the wheelhouse of the school board, right?
Right. It would be the vision on kind of the reality of the school that you currently face and what you would ideally like to do, knowing that that's probably several different options depending on what the possibility is on the other side in terms of funding, legal, zoning, and other issues.
So would that make sense as a first step forward for us to start nailing this down?
Well, I just wanted to say that, like, what I think would be helpful for me would be if within 1 week of concluding the final 2 interviews for the first 14, we got a list of the key information gathering that you've identified, knowing that that's not necessarily exhaustive and that you're going out to speak to other committees. If we as a group are going to reconvene on November 1st, I'd like to see the draft process guideline a week before that so I have time to process it and bring my questions. I'd also like a list of any other information that the other stakeholders have identified. So if we get nothing else out of the meeting tonight, I'd like to be clear that my expectations are that a week from the concluding the first 14 interviews, we should have a list of questions so that we can all think, hey, did we get everything? And that at least a week before we come together again, we see the draft of what we're going to be talking about so that we have at least a week to process it. And then after that, you know, I think that all of us might have a sense for what we think is the most important thing to happen first, but we don't know what all 14 people think that is. And so talking about how to go forward, there are questions that we all know need to be answered, and there are bodies that make more sense to start to answer it. And we have been working on information gathering. As Tim said, we don't have to wait to information gather until we get to the process point, but we shouldn't assume what the process is going to be.
Well, but I think two things to that. I think, first of all, there are 14 people, there are two bodies. Each body has its respective roles and responsibilities, some of which mesh. And, it seems to me that, one of the things I think is really important is the way this is teed up, we're going to have to bond the entire cost of whatever the school program is, and then we will recover or retire early that initial borrowing through development that comes later. And that's really important, because I think people would like to say we can get the development squared away before we start with the school program. And everything I've heard is that that's not going to be possible. The people who lend us money will say, this is all on you, Falls Church. If you get development down the road, that's great. So I think that's something that we really need to bear in mind as we approach this. And it does mean that probably a $300 million project is not wise. But I don't think this is a matter of a lack of information. I think it's a matter of we have certain numbers and facts that we don't like, and we wish they would go away. But they won't. And it seems to me the first thing that we have to do is figure out what are the needs for the school, and the school board is the body that does that kind of stuff. So we should sit down, we should sort this out. We can look at what the needs are, we can look at what the trends are, and we can figure out, site location obviously is going to be the big wild card. We want to be able to have something that we will be able to move around, because we're not going to know what's the most development optimal solution. But unless and until we nail down that, unless we have this kind of anchor, I don't see that we're going to do anything more than chase our tails.
Vice Mayor Conlon and Mr. Z, please.
So, Mr. Castillo, to your point, we do have to bond the whole cost. I think that we're all kind of there, that to start out, we have a little bit of money in our accounts, right, Mr. LeCondre? We have a little bit of money, but we're going to have to bond most of it. We have that much, yes.
We'll pass the hat at the end of the meeting, too.
Yes. And the school program is the purview of the school board. But at this point in the process, it just seems like there are so many questions about where that school program is going to take place. And if the people who are advancing the money to do it need to have a little more information about, can the high school be renovated? A little more actually being in the building, seeing it, feeling it, understanding it. And what does that mean as far as the money costs, as far as $40 million? If we renovate that exact building on that site, then there isn't going to be any commercial development. But I think that needs to be laid out in a way that is clear. So if someone shows up next week and wants to get involved in the process, they're going to be able to go, oh, here's option A, here's option B, here's option C and D. And I think that will help us in getting any kind of referendum passed, to show that all those questions have been asked and answered. Because we've talked about them in this group many times, but I don't know that the community is aware of that. So I think starting with this agreement on the process forward and looking at all those options again, I don't think the City Council is trying to take away the authority of the school board to plan the school program, but I think it really has to be intertwined at the beginning until we really get community agreement on this is the process, and not people saying, well, the school board just wants to spend $120 million and well, we're just going to let them. And that's not what's going to happen, and that isn't what would have happened thus far. But I think we have to make it clear to the community by laying things out in a much more methodical way than we have.
Yeah, and I think that would be my idea in this.
Mr. Z?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. What's different about this process is that we are now doing this in the clear instead of going behind closed doors, basically being in a black box. And to help us, we've hired, really expensive client consultants to help us, the clients, to first of all agree on a process. So we're not close to that. We could be close to that soon. They need to finish talking to all the people and then additional stakeholders, and then we've added a bunch tonight. So My thought is here that I am not willing to sit here and relitigate the entire process all over again by some special members of this group that say, well, this is what I think is most important. You ought to begin there. I think this is, can we get agreement that we ought to start at this point in time? I'm just not willing to go through all that. I think leadership here needs to exert some leadership, say, okay, we're done with this. We cannot relitigate this process beginning with everyone's pet ideas. In this regard, I completely agree with Ms. Oliver that we want to see what the process is, a draft of that. So at least we have something to react to. And now we're bouncing all over the place because we basically have, if I were back in grad school, I would call this eyewash. I mean, this really doesn't tell us anything. So, and now we're an hour and 1/10. Mayor, let's call this to an end. Let's go on with tonight's agenda.
Are there other comments from other folks?
Just one thing on schedule. Link has been with the city now for less than a month, and so they're getting started on their schedule. In the project schedule, October 11th is when they share the initial draft of what people are asking for tonight, of the identified decisions and the decisions point list. So that will be circulated on October 11th. We'll get feedback on that, and then flowing from that will be the roadmap and the sequence and timeline. That's due on October 19th. So that will meet the test of getting that well in advance for people to see before that November meeting. We'll send this schedule out just so everybody has that, and that governs the work going forward.
And if I may, I would just add that.
Uh-oh.
Well,
Sorry about that.
I think we're good. No, I would just add that, again, while I do believe there are pieces that you all can be working on and moving forward and gathering some of this information that is coming at some point on the process, wherever on the process it may be. This was just conceptually to show how some of these different decision points start to spread out and come back together. So this was by no means supposed to be our recommendation of what the process looks like at this point. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, but I think it pretty much captures reality, right? I mean,
Well, that remains to be seen, I think. I mean, I think the idea, it seems to me what's happened tonight is consistent with what we wanted to happen, which was someone to evaluate kind of where we are right now, to propose, based on that information, a way forward. And I think you're kind of in the middle of doing that, and it sounds like in the next month we're going to get that proposal, and we'll have an opportunity to say we don't agree with it, or we want it to change this way or that way, but we're getting someone from the outside to help us on the inside find a path forward. And it seemed to me that's sort of what we heard on August 9th. And so I don't think what's happening is inconsistent with what we envisioned would be happening. I know everyone wants to see things happen, real quick, and I think it sounds like this is consistent with the plan that was sort of set forth with us. So it seems to me that you're doing what we asked you to do, and I think in an appropriate timetable. So, but I think you had a comment from one of your colleagues.
Yeah, Mr. Webb.
Just real quick, and I would agree with what you're saying, Dave. I think they're doing what we've asked them to do. But what I will say that of what we're asking them to do and trying to move this along as quick as possible, we all, and self-included, because I was on the later side because I got super busy with work stuff on the later side of getting in touch with them, but we have to make sure that we make ourselves available, and the other folks who are going to be the other stakeholders that they interview make themselves available in a timely fashion, because if that does not happen, we're not going to get to a point of having decisions made, and that ultimately would then fall back on us that we didn't do our part of bringing them on board to help us get to a decision point. So we all have to make sure that we are available in a timely fashion to help them help us get to a point of making a decision.
So it's been a fairly quiet school board in terms of process issues. Are there additional thoughts, Ms. Gill?
No, I agree with the council members who have said that. I think that we've gone as far as we can tonight, and without a process, I don't know that we can do anything more than just rehash our previous discussions. And I would we adjourn until we can have a process to actually discuss and move forward with, and a list of items.
Anybody else?
So maybe you could, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just was agreeing with what Aaron said.
So maybe you could just summarize, I know you have previously, what the path forward is for your deliverables and what we can expect from you in the next couple weeks or months, and then we can wrap up this portion of our conversation tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go to the slide so everyone can have it in front of them. Just from tonight, what I would love, everyone around this table has our contact information. So the candid feedback from this initial phase of audits has been helpful. I know it feels like we've been rehashing things, and that's because we're getting into conversations you've had for years. But if you have additional thoughts from tonight that you would like us to be keeping in mind as we figure out the framework for this, we appreciate any questions and additional themes you want us to consider. Any input you have as a follow-up, you can get that to us. We'll be continuing the stakeholder audits as we develop the preliminary roadmap. By October 11th, as Wyatt said, that's our goal, to have something more concrete that gets into that list of extensive but not comprehensive questions and how those fit into decision points, and to start arranging them into something that is a process. It won't be a perfect process, I'm fully aware of that, and I know everyone will have additional opinions and comments on it, and the goal is for us to be able to work with each of you to figure out what needs to shift, what on that process doesn't make sense, if there are actually additional questions no one thought of in this round that we need to go back to. That's our chance to really dig into that, where you see feedback on preliminary process roadmap prior to the November 1st joint session, when we can report back out and get some of that feedback as a group. I think there are things that we illuminated tonight in terms of themes that everyone should be thinking about in terms of the information pieces of it and the structure of how this group moves forward, and if this continues to be the best way to meet once a month and move the conversation or not move the conversation, and if there needs to be some other type of structure, whatever that may be. I think those are the things that we'd be thinking about as we think about how this all fits into a timeline and the timing of it. Does anyone have any questions on this part of it?
Vice Mayor Conley.
You have site tour of George Mason High School up there before the November 1st joint session?
We heard from some folks that that's something that would be desired prior to the next meeting as an opportunity to actually see what this looks like. And when we talk about different questions that seem very abstract, it would give something concrete to the discussion. I did hear from other voices that going on a tour without having a plan for it and without having kind of the right guide to make that tour come to life may not be the best use. So it's up here as something that we want to get done, although I'd say that where it fits is flexible.
Any other comments or questions? Or Mr. Shields?
One thing on a upbeat note, the planning staff is getting ready to do work on planning the site, and we've got 2 grants that will help us with that. One is a transit and TLC grant for $60,000. We'll do transportation planning on the site, and the other is an urban development areas initiative grant for $50,000. So both of those will help pay for the master planning on our side. So those wheels are moving, and other wheels are moving even while we're doing this roadmap work.
How does the master plan, how do you master plan something at this stage?
We're going to work that out in the roadmap. And it will all be sequenced out properly. That we're laying out all the proper steps right now. But we've got money to do it. That's good.
But in other words, in all seriousness, you can plan something, but is this going to be overtaken by events? I mean, will the planning, for example, illuminate
I don't think the city
best
manager
site?
laid out a plan tonight. He just announced that we have a couple of
planning to
grants.
plan.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. I think that's all he said.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions? If not, we thank you very much for the good work you've done to date, and we look forward to hearing back from you shortly and to move this process along. But thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. We've got, looks like at least one other item on the agenda. Do you want to take a break before we continue on, or go on, keep on trucking? All right. I guess the next item is an update on elementary school planning. Did either of you want to take the lead on that, or how did you want to proceed with that portion of the meeting?
That's Dr. Jones.
And I think the question, at least when Wyatt and I spoke, was in relation to the modeling that the school board asked that we do. Right now, we're moving forward with Mount Daniel, of course, which is, we'll still move the K-1-2 to the Mount Daniel campus at an enrollment number of 660 students. So it, greatly depends in the future on what our enrollment looks like and what those percentage enrollments will be on an annual basis. But we know as a school board going forward that we're going to need additional space for children. TJ is hovering right now around 820 students. It's over capacity. And we also know that when we move students to Mount Daniel, depending on how fast the city continues to grow, we are hoping that we can be in that building for a decade with 660. But if we have more years like we had this year where our enrollment is spiking again, which we've been, growing. We've grown 30% in the last 5 years as a school system in student enrollment. And if we continue on that pace, the Mount Daniel will fill up. We are also seeing huge enrollment pressures with preschool. And again, those are children with special needs. And by law, we must educate those children. And we have seen that number go from 50-odd students last year to just over 70. I think we're at 73 as of today. And we do have one question that we get in the city with the preschool is, well, but do you really have to educate all of those students? Well, we're trying to meet two components there. For every teacher, we can have 4 or 5 children who have special needs. And that's pretty maxed out for a teacher and then also a para. And then what we do is we take children in the city who are, some of them are at risk, economically disadvantaged, or students who are English as a second language. We fill some additional spots in the classroom with our at-risk students. And then we take some tuition students. And the tuition students don't cost us additional money because the teacher and the para are already there. What they do is help offset cost. And sometimes we can have enough tuition students where we'll have a portion of the para position that's paid for. So seeing that we're having pressures everywhere, we have modeled on 2 properties, openly and publicly. One of them was Fellows, which, the city council is very aware of that. And that's a property we've talked about for years, right across from TJ. And really to answer the question, what will fit on that piece of property? Is it a 1 grade level solution? Can you fit 3 grade levels? What we've been able to determine is, what are the trees that have to remain on that property, because it's a very complex property. There's a tree right in the middle that is huge and must remain there by law, so you have to actually build around that tree. So we have modeled that you can do a 1 grade level solution on that property. You could squeeze in a little bit extra just depending on what the grade level was, but that doesn't include things like a great old big gym. So you couldn't have 5th graders, for instance, who need a lot more space. The other thing, when we were presenting the modeling for the Fellows property, as you know, Fellows does have a cost to acquire property. So the other question came up, is there any property in the city that could actually be considered that the city already owns that might work? Out of that discussion in that work session, the Madison property came up because that was originally a school site. I think people have been in the city for a long time know it was looked at back during MEH, I believe it was. Pretty contentious, and the school board discussed that openly, that, we sure we even want to discuss that as an option. But the reality is we are going to have land pressures and we are going to need school sites. So the biggest issue when the school district looked at that property before, and again, some of you around the table will be much more educated about it than I, because I didn't live here at the time, but was losing the fields was a really big issue, because it is a space that is heavily used by Park and Rec for a lot of our for our children. And so what we wanted to do was look at Madison and can you model a 1 or a 2 grade level solution and maintain all of the fields? And is that even possible? Because you can't discuss an option if you don't know if the option is doable. And I think the school board has been very thoughtful, as we've had so many projects to think about, that modeling helps us make sure that before you go down the avenue to say, let's go talk in a CIP about acquiring property, have you looked at the property to see if the solution even works? And I think the school board has, over the last couple of years, has done a lot of work to make sure that nothing goes in the CIP that they don't believe, okay, this would be worth bringing up as a discussion item. So trying to answer those factual questions first. And with Madison, it was a 2 grade level solution. right? That was just last Tuesday. You can fit a 2 grade level solution there and maintain all of the fields. And that was a big question that we needed to answer. And that's it. It really is just looking at what are the future options in the city.
Yes, of course. Vice Mayor Connolly and then Ms. Hardy.
So, Dr. Jones, how far into the future is that need projected to be? I know it depends on how quickly we continue to grow, but how far are we looking out?
September 30th is when we do our official count. And so we've just started that work this week. And they'll project again by looking at natural growth. They'll look at our preschool numbers. They'll look at every student who's been born in Falls Church and try to adjust that. I will say, as we said in the budget this year, the one thing we did not factor in anywhere was looking at children from the development. We know what that number is, and working very closely with the city. But when we looked at budgetary issues, we just went with our natural growth. And it's kind of one of those lose-lose situations, because if you just look at natural growth, we're going to have some children from development. So the children that show up in September are probably going to be under. If we build in the economic development and it's slightly under, for instance, at Tenor Hill, it was originally going to open much earlier, so we would have seen students earlier. Had we built that in, we probably would have been over in projections. So this year we actually went with not projecting. So what will that look like in the future? Once we take our natural growth, we can look at it both ways, a high and a low projection. One will have economic development in it, one won't. And then you've also got to go and look at the property that is on the corner, of Washington and Broad, as well as West and Broad. And are you wanting to look out 5 years or 7 years for enrollment and what that will mean? Well, you don't really have the plans for those buildings. And what we've discovered, I think, in all the work we've done with general government is that how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and how many units, all of those impact how many students. So that's a hard question to answer, I guess, in a very long way to say. All of those factors have to come into play.
Ms. Hardy?
First is going back to kind of the update you gave, Dr. Jones, on Mount Daniel. I heard you say kind of 10 years is what we think kind of the best case scenario could look like in terms of the life of the school based on the 660 capacity. Are we going back and revising our enrollment projections based on what we see this year? Do we think that this year was just kind of an anomaly, or do we think that it could be a continuous thing? In which case, what's the worst case? Is it more like 6 years, 8 years?
I wish that I could say that. We don't really know. And again, I don't do the projections. We rely on Weldon Cooper, and they do them for this, for Virginia Department of Education as well as nationally. And it's the drivers that you don't know. Kindergarten is always an unknown, because you just don't know how many little kiddos are living in the city that are coming into kindergarten. And we don't know with economic development. It's just, we don't know what we don't know. The projection that we have was based off a Weldon Cooper projection, very much about natural growth. And it does take us out a decade. If we have between 5 and 7% growth on an annual basis, and that starts kind of trending up again, which we saw in 2012. It's one of those years we had a 6 or so percent. We did slow down a little bit to a 4% for 2 years. If it starts kicking back up again, we'll be lucky for it not to be full within 4 or 5 years. And it is a hard enrollment cap, which Falls Church City has never had before. We cannot go over 660. And I think any of you know that if you're in our buildings, we find great ways to use closets and extra rooms and all kinds of things, but we can't put even trailers on that property. So the pressure will be even greater to make sure we're ready to go with a 1 grade level solution fairly quickly. Just being prepared.
Yeah, I mean, given that it is a hard capacity cap, I guess my suggestion is that we look at what that worst case scenario is, because if it is 4 or 5 years by the time it opens, we kind of need to have the next plan already.
Well, that's why the school board's doing all the work right now.
And on that point, so I'm glad that we're looking at creative options across the city, like Madison and the community center. On that point, though, it sounds like where we've ended up in terms of what's feasible is kind of these 1 to 2 grade level mini schools across the city. And this is me more wearing my parent hat than my council member hat. Is it seems like what would be the community would like, and I personally would like to hear it too, is a discussion on what is kind of the future of our schools. More of a philosophical discussion of, are we heading down the path of having a bunch of micro elementary schools, because I think that has a certain implications. Are we going to have a north and a south elementary school? Are we going to have 3 elementary schools that then all feed an MEH? And I think that feels like a more upfront discussion to have, and that can drive a lot of the capacity planning and land use, options down the road. But it feels like we've kind of jumped the gun a bit and started looking at a bunch of potential sites, when I think in reality, if we can have that more upfront discussion on, given what we think, the future of enrollment looks like, when we're going to outgrow Mount Daniel, when we're going to outgrow TJ, feels like this is, we need to go and have multiple elementary schools across the city, and these are the sizes of parcels we need. That feels like a great community discussion, and it feels like something that the school board can help us, frame up.
Well, I would respectfully disagree that we're jumping the gun. The school board is obviously very attuned to enrollment questions and pressures, because that's our job. And the other problem is we're not 2.2 square miles anymore, we're 2.34, but there's only so much more real estate to go around. Can you build schools on parcels that enable multi-grade solutions? I'm sure you can. Can you do pocket schools? I think that's also a possibility. I think there are efficiencies with more consolidated solutions, but I don't think anything is off the table. I don't think anything has been decided. And if anybody on council has ideas for other options and places, I'd love to hear about them.
And I might go back to, I want to say 2012 is when the last time we modeled. We know that to get a K-1-2 building, to get another solution, it needs to be at least 5 acres. And so the school board previous board did a lot of work on trying to look at, can we find 5 acres? And at that time, when we put out our RFP for Mount Daniel, we even wrote into the RFP that we were willing to go within, it was either 1 or 1.5 mile radius. Mr. Shields, you might remember you were on that committee, mile and a half radius outside of Falls Church City in order to acquire 5 acres, and even the developers didn't come back with anything other than, actually, interesting enough, one of the components that we did get back was Madison. Have you looked at Madison? So just so you know, it is the work of the board. I mean, I was as surprised, I think, as anybody that we were looking at Madison, because I thought it would be actually more contentious than what it was even over the past few weeks, just talking about it, because, having lived through working with Thackeray, which is next to a city park, and people get really nervous about that. But the school board, I think, is trying to be thoughtful and look at property that is already owned in the city, because then at least you're just building the building and not having to pay to acquire the property. But we do run all of those numbers, and it'll be continued work, I'm sure, for the next couple of years.
To Ms. Hardy's point, I do think that as a board, we probably need to sit down and do a larger plan and vision for our elementary schools, because it is growing. And I mean, as a parent, it is very unappealing to think that I would have my kids at 3 different elementary schools around the city, because each one is in a different grade, each place, and it's also very expensive because each school requires its own principal, assistant principal, custodial staff, food service staff, more buses. The costs multiply each time. So I do think that as a board, we should step back and say, what is our vision for our elementary school students? How are we going to, do we want to have a couple of smaller elementary schools and not try to put a different grade at each school? And what can we afford? Because it does get just exponentially more expensive each time we build a 1 grade level solution. I think we're seeing that at Thackeray right now, especially where they don't have a custodial staff, and I hear that teachers are cleaning up vomit of students because we can't afford to put a janitor there. So it does put more pressure on them as well to try to take on a lot more tasks that they really aren't equipped to do, because we can't afford to staff that building maybe at the level it needs to be.
Mr. Duncan? And then Ms. Oliver.
Since our high-priced consultants have left, they don't have to listen to me say this, but what you just said raises the question, the whole issue of consolidation raises the question of whether, on the Upper West Side, we should be thinking about that as an opportunity to, look at grade configuration in a way that enables us to achieve some economies of scale up there that maybe we have not thought about before. That's one of the things that I'm going to raise with them when I talk to them on Wednesday. But what I wanted to ask Dr. Jones, so you're back the envelope on a K-1-2 school is 5 acres. What's your 1 grade solution? I mean, a 1 grade solution here is now about 200 and 225 kids, right, or projecting ahead for growth, it would be about that. So that's maybe 10 classrooms. So how much land and what's the footprint of the new TJ wing? I mean, how many classrooms does that have in it?
Yeah, what we're trying to look at right now, if we were building a one grade level solution, would be 12 classrooms.
12.
And it would be times 22 or times 24, depending on the grade level. At Mount Daniel right now, we're looking at 10 on a grade level if it's a K-1-2 building and stays a K-1-2 for the next 2 decades. But there are 30 classrooms. We were hoping to have 36, and that was part of that reduction, reducing 6 classrooms.
So you're building 10 to 12 classrooms, and in a building that, if it is multi-story, would be, what would the footprint be? And, you know, what kind of land do you need to, what does the state require you to have in the way of land around it to
There isn't really a state requirement. There are guidelines at the state level, but urban schools are not following those guidelines anymore. And probably Bailey's is the, the one that's closest where it's really compact footprint. Mount Daniel is, I hate to give you the footprint. I would need to bring that number back to you because you've got the old section and you've got the new section, and so I would need to see what the total footprint is.
So I guess, the question would be, another point of information would be, how many acres are we talking about for a one grade solution school? Are we talking acre and a half? That would be a interesting thing to know.
And that is what we've modeled, and I have that number. I just don't have it right in front of me because we've got a one grade level solution at Fellows, and it's about as compact as it gets. And the 2 grade solution that we have at Madison is just about as compact as it gets because you've got to remove all those fields. So you're looking at a very small area of property. So I can get that number.
So basically,
we have it.
Either or both of those could be overlaid to any other opportunity that might arise, either on the Upper West Side or on some other parcel of land. That we haven't yet envisioned, but which we should identify. I mean, I talked the other day with somebody who was involved in locating the girls' home, the Aurora House home, years ago, and very controversial issue. Nobody wanted it in their backyard, just a mess. And they stepped back and just did a community-wide audit. They just threw open the doors and said, we're going to look at every parcel of land that could even possibly accommodate the kind of structure that we're putting up. And, they had several dozen. I mean, most of them were quickly dropped out, but they ended up with, 2 or 3, and then finally chose the one they chose. It was a very broad information-seeking process, very public, and, I think that's something, when I heard that story, that we could go through here to try to find a place to, accommodate the growth that we know, that we hope we're going to have as long as the city continues to prosper and grow.
Ms. Oliver?
So I'm happy to leave that question to the school board to wrestle with, but I think that the appropriate thing that we need to be aware of is that we need to understand what your elementary school planning is so we can understand what we can afford. And what we need to be able to afford for future elementary schools impacts what we can afford for the high school. So for me, the important message tonight is, yes, it sounds like you have a lot to do. It sounds like you've got a good start. It sounds like you've got some good ideas, good questions raised. Go to it, but you need to go to it kind of quickly because it's going to factor into our larger decision about the campus plan for the MEH George Mason campus. And I personally don't want to you're the experts. You're supposed to be the experts on this. And, I, as a parent and as a citizen might have ideas, but that's not my position as a city council member to speak to. But what I think is very important is that you need to come up with some elementary school planning quickly so that we can look at some financing numbers so that it can factor into this larger decision, because it's become clear that it's very urgent. And when we did the financial modeling for debt capacity in the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, we did add in an estimate of what we might be able to afford in future debt capacity for city infrastructure needs and school needs. And I'm starting to think that we didn't put enough money in that in terms of out-year needs for what's going to be coming along, and we need that information to move forward.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point, Ms. Oliver, that the Jefferson Institute used to be on Frady Park, Madison School used to be on Madison Park, and there was a decapitalization in part of the school system. One of the reasons we looked at Madison was that that land is bought and paid for. You have to build the building and you have to get the dirt. The dirt adds a substantial amount to the ultimate cost. I don't know from a prioritization standpoint or from a timing standpoint how we would sequence elementary school planning into the high school planning. From what I've heard, we may not need a new high school anytime soon, based on some of the things the consultants said. But I think you're right, we may need a bigger boat. And I don't know how much bigger a boat that would be. But, we will certainly work to figure out what the options are on the size of the bread box basis.
I just want to add that there is opportunity cost. Even if we own the land, it sounds like you've tried to plan around that, but don't say that there's no cost, because I'm sure Parks and Recs would not agree with that.
Out of pocket cost. How's that?
I was just wondering, in that vein, were we ever, and I think Mr. Duncan mentioned this too, possibly putting more schools up where Mason is, and maybe putting a middle school, in addition to the middle school, maybe, TJ moving that up there, and then we'd have the property for K through 2, where TJ is now. Have we even thought about that?
I guess it comes down to how much more do you want to borrow, because then you won't be able to develop that land.
But it's going to cost us money to buy land, yes? But we already own the land.
I mean, Dr. Jones, it comes down to a question of relative valuation of land, I guess. And can you get a better price somewhere
Well,
else?
I'm just thinking, we're talking about these so-called micro schools, elementary schools, and it seems to me we have all this property where Mason is now, and I don't see why we can't combine all the schools into the one site, or at least most of them.
And I might just add, I think every school board, when you get new people, have new ideas. The previous school board did look at that very thoroughly, as recent as 2011. And they, as a school board, were pretty strong in their thought process that we did not want younger children on that main campus. And we had some board members that have been on this board, I think, for a long time and have a lot of experiences and understand the complexities of that campus very well. You are next to Route 66. You're next to the Metro, you're next to, Route 7. It's a very complex property to secure. We had a lot of discussion about, having outside play space that would be more exposed to those areas where children are outside a lot. I mean, as you know, just in the last 2 years, we've had 1 or 2 scares that have involved the police on TJ. Just having the tree-lined area where people are very nervous about securing the property. So that was a big discussion point. And this school board obviously may go in a different direction because you're faced with different challenges now by growth, but that was a big component, was not feeling comfortable having young children on that campus. So that is one piece of it. The other thing that I had not heard until tonight is the 2 elementary idea. Well, that's an old philosophical, something that was seen as being very important in Falls Church, and maybe it's not going to be anymore, but we originally had 2 elementaries. We had one on each, actually was it 3 on different sides of the town, and part of that was in bringing the school community and children together. There's a big difference in having your grade level of kindergartners that are lifers that go to school together than having one elementary on one side of the town, one on the other. You get a lot of competition, especially when you have 2 elementaries, about which elementary is better, how does it impact, property values based off which school is, especially if it's a K-5, getting better test scores, which school has the Section 8 housing that is actually going to that area, so certain people's housing prices are going to drop in the city. Very, very contentious issue, and as a school system, we have always had the philosophy that we want to keep our children together, and that was part of the school community, but again, this school board may decide that we can't do that anymore and want to change philosophy, but it is a very hot topic, contentious issue. I opened an elementary where I was the first elementary where they had 1 and they went to 2. The competition was unbelievable having 2 different schools, and it's a tough issue to go through. So it's been a philosophical issue that this community has been very strong about through the years that would need a lot of thought process and couldn't be a fast one.
one of the things I learned when I was preparing for the Planning Commission at Fairfax County, Mount Daniel used to be a K-6 school. So, who knew?
Okay, other questions or comments? Mr. Steiner?
Just real quick, and going forward, I'm interested in what the school experience and theory is with putting schools in mixed-use projects of one kind or another. And then also, I'm interested because Fairfax County is seeing the same sorts of things with their school population, so is Arlington County. Is it possible to maintain an independent school system but share facilities?
With just general mixed use?
No, well, that would be one question. The second question, is it possible for us to maintain our independent school system but perhaps share facilities either with Arlington or Fairfax because they're undergoing the same sorts of population? I don't really want an answer tonight, but I'm interested in exploring whether that's a possibility. Otherwise, we are into this 2 square mile thing, with all the costs that people have talked about.
And we do have quite a bit of information available. I can't remember if this budget cycle we got into it as deeply as the year before to answer people's questions in the community. It actually will cost more if you separate it out, not less. We could not go to Arlington County. Has to be with Fairfax County. And so that option, is set for us. As far as mixed-use development, Mr. Shields and I have discussed, especially in early childhood, there are around the country some mixed-use developments, especially on preschool age, where they will build a preschool center into a mixed-use development and actually have that, paid for to help with some facilities issues. But again, those are all things we haven't really explored here, and it can be done where you have a separate facility in a mixed use that's still safe.
Thanks very much. Thanks. I appreciate all the work. We're all in this together.
Any other comments or questions? I think that's all we got on this side of the table.
Great.
Should we go ahead and conclude our joint meeting? I don't know. It looks like we have one more agenda item, just scheduling on our side. So, thanks.
Actually, sorry, could I just? I wanted to apologize for being so late. As you know, we had to reconstitute our special ed committee, and tonight was their first meeting, and I'm the liaison. And honestly, it was so incredibly positive. We had the VDOE special ed consultant come up and do training. I just didn't want to leave, so I'll watch the recording, but. I apologize for being so horribly late.
Okay, thanks very much, and I guess we'll see you guys next month. Okay, so on the city council side, are there any scheduling issues or comments or questions?
Just this Thursday, I'll be at MVTC, which is why I'll miss the... Don't we have an open house or a... Yeah.
Oh, we do?
Just FYI.
Okay.
Is it in Chambers?
Yes, it is.
What else you got, Wyatt? Anything else scheduling wise?
I would just note this financial policies is not for adoption on October 11th. It's really just an opportunity for public comment on those. We want to get those out to the public.
Microphone, please.
Make sure people are aware of what we're thinking
Wyatt,
about.
microphone, please. Thank you.
We want to make sure that people are aware of what we're thinking about with our financial policies. So again, we'll have adoption scheduled for October 24th, not the 11th. We'll just make that change to the schedule.
Okay, any other
On financial policies, I think last time in work session, we talked about possibly doing a town hall of some kind. So some other opportunity besides public comment in our meeting next week. Do we think we have time to squeeze that in before the 24th?
Well, that was the subject of some discussion at our meeting. I think the idea ultimately was there's some who did not want to do it. I am in favor of doing it. And I think the idea was maybe let's go ahead and have the meeting on the 11th and see what kind of response we get and then figure out whether we need to have one. And we could make a decision on the 11th whether we should have a town hall maybe in the next 10 days or so before the 25th or 4th or whatever it is. So anyway, that's sort of what came about.
So my suggestion is, frankly, financial policies is dry and boring to most people. And so I feel like in order to get people to engage on this, we need to give them the layman's version of it for people to even know what we're talking about and then the implications of it so that they can actually come and comment. Because I don't think most people understand the details. And so my prediction is we're probably going to have very little public comment. You'll probably hear from a couple of people who show up for most things about financial policies. And so I guess I'd suggest if we can somehow do like the 101 version just for the public to understand what it is that we're proposing to change, that might be a helpful way to make sure that we're at least
One
trying
thing
to
that we've talked along those lines is to have a presentation air on our public access channel that would feature the inimitable Richard LeCondre explaining in 101 terms
In
what
101,
financial
yes.
policy, what they're for, how they work, and have that be a video that's just a resource for us sort of forever. So we've got some work we need to do to make that happen, but that
maybe we
was
can
one
make
idea
it-
to try to accomplish that.
maybe the guest commentary this coming week in the paper could be another way, whatever we decide to do in the video version, like the written version.
Yeah.
Just something to reach more people, because frankly, if you just write financial policies adoption, people glaze over it, and I don't think they're really going to care.
And I guess my point is that if people don't care, I mean, we're elected to make decisions and to think about this stuff, and so not everything has to go out for full public review. If the public's not interested, they're not interested. We can just make a decision and go forward.
My sense is people will be interested if they understand what it is that we're talking about, and I just don't know if the average person is going to understand. I should give people more credit, I guess.
Okay, other comments, questions, or should we go ahead and?
I think I like Ms. Hardy's suggestions, and as we go towards the 11th, there were a number of questions that we posed at our last meeting, and so I assume that those are things that you're crunching away on. Okay.
Okay, anything else for this evening? Should we go ahead and adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second, all in favor, we're adjourned.